like it when a story has a clear ending. The police do an investigation, they find the bad guy, and the judge reads the sentence. But sometimes the official story just doesn't add up. The clues don't fit, the timeline is wrong, and the accident looks a lot like a cover-up. Today we are looking at 5 cases where the official explanation just isn't enough, and the alternative theories are genuinely terrifying. Let's begin. Some tragedies strike out of nowhere, interrupting lives that were already in chaos. But the most unsettling ones happen when everything is perfect. On November 13th, 2022, Moscow, Idaho, was the picture of an ideal college town. The population hovers just over 25,000, small enough that you recognize faces at the grocery store, but big enough to hide secrets. The victims were the kind of people who make you feel like you missed out on the best years of your life. Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves, both 21, were ride-or-die besties. They grew up together in Coeur d'Alene and were inseparable, working at the same local restaurant. Then there was Zana Kernodle, 20, a marketing student with a spark that lit up rooms, and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, 20, a triplet who was just visiting for the night. They were vibrant, young, and living in that specific kind of collegiate bliss, where the biggest worry is usually a hangover or a midterm. The house on 1122 King Road was a 3-story rental sitting on a hillside with a layout so confusing it had sliding doors on multiple levels. The timeline of that night started off wholesomely. Ethan and Zana hit up a Sigma Chi party, stumbling home around 1:45 a.m. Meanwhile, Maddie and Kaylee were doing the classic downtown run, the Corner Club sports bar, followed by a stop at the Grub Truck. We've all seen the footage. It became the most analyzed clip on the internet. 2 girls waiting for their carbonara, smiling, chatting, completely unaware that a clock was ticking down. They got home at 1:56 a.m. By 2 a.m., everyone was inside. The house went quiet. And that is where the normalcy ends. While the victims were living the best years of their lives, just a few miles away across the state line in Pullman, Washington, there was a shadow. Brian Christopher Kohberger, 28 years old. This wasn't your typical drifter or unknown aggressor. Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. He had moved to Washington in the summer of 2022, leaving behind a life in Pennsylvania where he had been a school security officer. He was arrested on December 30th, 2022, after a cross-country drive back to Pennsylvania that involved getting pulled over twice in Indiana. Much to the delight of body cam enthusiasts everywhere, he eventually pleaded guilty to all charges in July 2025, taking 4 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an extra 10 years for burglary, likely just to make sure the door was really locked. But a guilty plea is just a legal conclusion. It's not an explanation. And when you look at who he was, the why gets terrifying. According to investigative sources who spoke to People magazine in January 2023, Kohberger allegedly slid into the DMs of one of the female victims on Instagram in late October 2022, just weeks before the nightmare. The messages were simple but persistent. "Hey, how are you?" He sent it again, and again, and again, hundreds of times, according to sources familiar with the investigation. She never responded. Now, for most of us, being left on read or ignored is a sign to move on. Maybe listen to some sad music, eat a pint of ice cream, and get over it. For Kohberger, it was apparently a declaration of war. His now deleted Instagram account reportedly followed Mogen, Goncalves, and Kernodle, but it gets creepier. A former employee at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow told investigators that Kohberger had been a regular customer. Both Mogen and Kernodle worked there as servers, so he knew them. He'd seen them serving customers, smiling, living their lives completely unaware that they were being watched by a guy who seemingly couldn't handle the fact that he wasn't the main character in their story. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer suggested the perpetrator was an individual with absolutely horrible, harmful intent against these women, specifically linked to the incel ideology. Incel, short for involuntary celibate. Men who feel entitled to attention they aren't getting. They blame women for their own romantic failures. They categorize the world into Chads, men who get women, and Stacys, women who reject them. It sounds like bad internet slang, but the toll on human life is real. In 2018, Alec Manassian drove a van into pedestrians in Toronto, taking 11 lives, screaming about the incel rebellion. Kohberger fits the profile. In middle school, he was reportedly overweight and awkward, fixated on a girl named Kim Kennelly. He left love letters in her locker repeatedly. She wanted nothing to do with him. Her mother said Kim would say, "Oh my God, leave me alone." Kohberger eventually lost the weight, he got fit, he got educated, but he seemingly never lost the chip on his shoulder. The surveillance footage from the night of the incident supports this obsessive circling. A white Hyundai Elantra was seen making multiple passes near the house, 3:29 a.m., 4:04 a.m., then speeding away at 4:20 a.m. He was circling, like a shark, or like a guy who really sucks at parallel parking. But given the evidence left behind, he wasn't looking for a parking spot. The nature of the tragedy supports this in horrifying ways. All 4 victims were fatally harmed while they were in their beds, at their most vulnerable. Some experts have noted that this specific method is an intensely personal method of execution, requiring close physical proximity. The brutality, especially the sheer number of injuries Kernodle suffered, more than 50, many defensive, suggests rage, not just the intent to end a life. But there's another angle that connects Kohberger to one of America's most notorious serial predators, and the connection is chilling. Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, took the lives of 10 people in Kansas between 1974 and 1991. He's currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences. In January 2023, after Kohberger's arrest, Rader sent an email to TMZ claiming the Idaho events were an imitation of his own crimes, specifically his 1974 attack on the Otero family, where he silenced 4 people in their home. Here's where it gets disturbing. Brian Kohberger graduated from high school in Pennsylvania in 2013, worked as a school security officer, and then pursued psychology at Community College and DeSales University. He earned bachelor's and master's degrees before moving to Washington in summer 2022 to pursue his PhD in criminology. At Washington State University, Kohberger worked as a teaching assistant until just weeks before the tragedy, when he was terminated due to complaints about his behavior and conduct toward women. His defense team later claimed he had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, though the judge noted Kohberger appeared highly functioning in court. Kohberger had studied under Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist who literally wrote the book on Dennis Rader. Her publication, Confession of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, was based on extensive interviews and correspondence with Rader himself. Rader's daughter, Kerry Rawson, told News Nation that her stomach turned when she learned about the connection. She said she literally physically got ill, knowing that Kohberger had studied under the same professor who had developed such a close relationship with her convicted father. Think about it. Kohberger spent years studying criminology and criminal psychology. He had access to detailed case studies, criminal methodologies, and investigative techniques. If he wanted to learn how to commit the perfect crime, he had the academic resources to study exactly how past offenders operated, and crucially, how they got caught. The similarities are uncanny. BTK's first attack on the Otero family involved breaking into a home, cutting phone lines, and methodically attacking 4 family members. Kohberger entered a home at night, wielded a sharp instrument, and attacked victims in their beds. It's almost as if he was trying to follow a syllabus. Rader himself acknowledged that the theory wasn't far-fetched, though he denied any direct communication with Kohberger. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of the case, and one that still causes heated debate across true crime communities, involves the 2 roommates who survived that night, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke. The timeline of their actions has raised questions that many people still can't reconcile. Around 4 a.m., Mortensen was awakened by sounds on the 3rd floor. She heard what she thought was Gonkovs playing with her dog. Then she heard someone say, "There's someone here." Investigators believe this may have been Kernodle, realizing an intruder was in the house. Mortensen opened her door but saw nothing. She heard crying coming from Kernodle's room. Then she heard a male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Security cameras picked up sounds of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking repeatedly starting around 4:17 a.m. When Mortensen opened her door a 3rd time, she saw a figure in black clothing and a mask covering his nose and mouth walking toward her. The man walked right past her and exited through the kitchen sliding glass door. Mortensen later told police she stood in frozen shock and then locked herself in her room. She didn't call 911. That detail, that a roommate saw a masked stranger in the house and didn't immediately call police, would become one of the most controversial and scrutinized aspects of the entire case. According to her own testimony, she was intoxicated and didn't want to believe what was going on. At approximately 4:26 a.m., she went downstairs to the 1st floor bedroom where Bethany Funke was sleeping. On her way, she saw Kernodle lying on the floor of her bedroom. She thought Kernodle might just be drunk. The two surviving roommates locked themselves in Funke's room and spent hours trying to contact their housemates. Phone records later revealed by the defense show activity that raises even more questions. Funke called her dad at 7:30 a.m. Both roommates used their phones that morning. Mortensen was on Instagram for over 2 hours. She also spent time on Snapchat and Indeed, a job search platform. At 10:23 a.m., more than 6 hours after she saw the masked intruder, Mortensen finally started texting her roommates again. "Pulse answer," she texted Gonçalves. "Are you up?" she asked Mogan. They didn't call 911 until 11:58 a.m., nearly 8 hours after the nightmare occurred. When they did call, they reported an unconscious person, not a crime scene. Why wait 8 hours?
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah.
If you see a masked stranger in your house, hear crying and disturbing sounds, and your roommates won't respond to texts, why wouldn't you immediately call for help? Why spend 2 hours on Instagram while your friends might be in danger? The speculation ranged from reasonable to wild conspiracy. Some theorized the roommates were somehow involved or had knowledge of what was coming. Others suggested they knew Kohberger and were protecting him. The darkest theories claimed they participated, but experts in trauma psychology offer a very different explanation. Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a UC Irvine professor specializing in developmental psychology, explains that the brain, especially a 20-something intoxicated brain, doesn't work like a tactical computer. We have the amygdala, the lizard brain that screams run or fight, and the prefrontal cortex, the CEO that makes rational decisions. At 4 a.m., drunk, scared, and confused, the lizard brain takes over. And the lizard brain has a third option we often forget: freeze. It's called the normalcy bias, or cognitive dissonance. Your brain refuses to accept the horror because the horror is too big. A masked man, probably a frat prank. Crying? Drama with the boyfriend. The thud? Someone fell out of bed. You rationalize the terror away because the alternative is accepting that a predator just walked past you. Dylan and Bethany likely talked each other down. It's fine, don't be dramatic, go back to sleep. Women are also socialized to not be the hysterical girl. You don't want to call the cops on a party house because your roommate dropped a lamp. You don't want to be that person, so you wait. You scroll Instagram to numb the anxiety. You look for a job to remind yourself there is a future. And there's one more crucial point. Investigators cleared both roommates early in the investigation. They've never been named as suspects or persons of interest. If there was any evidence suggesting involvement, prosecutors would have pursued it, especially in a major case with this much public attention. Still, the question remains in online discussions. Could those 8 hours have made a difference? Would the outcome have changed if help had arrived sooner? We'll never know, and that uncertainty is part of what makes this so persistent and so painful for the victims' families. The University of Idaho demolished the house in December 2023. A memorial garden, the Vandal Healing Garden, opened in 2024. The 4 victims received posthumous degrees at the spring 2023 commencement ceremony. On July 2, 2025, after facing the possibility of the ultimate sentence, Kohberger pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, without parole, plus 10 years for burglary, and ordered to pay $250,000 in fines and $20,000 in restitution to the victims' families. Even with a guilty plea, even with life sentences, even with all the investigation and evidence, we still don't have a complete understanding of why this happened. We probably never will, because at the end of the day, the only person who truly knows why 4 innocent college students lost their futures in their sleep is Brian Kohberger, and he's not talking beyond his guilty plea. Sometimes there is no satisfying explanation. Sometimes evil is just evil, and understanding it completely is impossible. And speaking of beautiful places hiding ugly secrets, let's go to Bangkok. On July 16, 2024, the housekeeping staff at the Grand Hyatt Erawan Hotel in Bangkok prepared themselves for the usual routine, changing sheets, replacing tiny shampoos, and judging the guests' hygiene habits. Instead, they pushed open the door to Suite 502 and walked into a silent nightmare. It looked like a setup for a game of Cluedo, only there was no Colonel Mustard, and the library was a 5-star hotel room. 6 remains were scattered across the luxury suite. There was no crimson stain on the walls, no signs of a brawl, and the furniture wasn't overturned. It was eerily peaceful. On the dining table, a lavish lunch sat perfectly arranged. Fried rice, vegetables, soups, all still wrapped in cling film, untouched. But on a separate table, there was a different story. 6 teacups, some empty, some partially full. All of them were spiked with enough toxic agents to permanently silence a small hamlet. The victims were all of Vietnamese descent, a mix of family and business associates. There was Thi Nguyen Phuong, 46, and her husband Hong Pham Thanh, 49, a power couple in the construction business. There was Thi Nguyen Phuong Lan, 47, acting as a mediator, which, considering how this ended, implies she had the hardest job in the room. Then there was Dinh Tran Phu, 37, a celebrity makeup artist whose portfolio was likely worth more than my entire existence. And finally, 2 American citizens, Dang Hung Van, 55, and the woman at the center of the storm, Shireen Chong, 56. Within 24 hours, the Thai authorities slammed the gavel down. A mutual tragedy. Case closed. They claimed Shireen Chong administered the substance to the other 5 over a bad investment debt and then ended her own story. It was a tidy bow on a very messy package. But if you've been on the internet for more than 5 minutes, you know that when the official story is this clean, this fast, it's usually hiding a lot of dirt. According to the official police timeline, this was all about money. Roughly 10 million Thai baht, or about $280,000 US. Shireen Chong had allegedly borrowed this money from the married couple, Nguyen Phuong and Pham Thanh, with the promise of investing it in a hospital construction project in Japan. Now, I'm no financial advisor, but if someone asks me for $250,000 to build a hospital in a country they don't live in, I'm going to need to see some blueprints, or at least a brochure. Apparently, the project was a ghost. It never materialized. The couple wanted their money back, and the dispute was heading to court in Japan. The theory goes that Chong, facing legal consequences and unable to repay the debt, orchestrated this final meeting in Bangkok. She checked into Suite 502 on July 14th. On July 15th, around 2 p.m., food was delivered, 6 cups of tea, ordered by victim Dang Hung Van, interestingly, not Chong herself, and fried rice. Security footage shows Chong receiving the delivery alone. She refused the waiter's offer to brew the tea, and the waiter later reported she seemed visibly stressed and spoke very little. By 2:17 p.m., all 6 victims were inside the locked suite. Nobody entered or left after that. The door was locked from the inside. When staff discovered them the next evening around 5:30 p.m., they'd been gone for 12 to 24 hours. Cyanide was found in all 6 teacups. Their lips and nails had turned dark purple from oxygen deprivation, and their internal systems showed catastrophic chemical failure. Classic biological markers of toxicity. Thai authorities declared it a tragic final act. Motive, debt, perpetrator, Shireen Chong, case closed. Except, does that really feel right to you? Let's talk about the harmful agent, cyanide. This isn't arsenic or rat poison. You don't pick this up at the grocery store next to the detergent. Potassium cyanide is a Schedule 1 poison. It is highly regulated. In crystal or powder form, acquiring it leaves a paper trail that glows in the dark. So, how did Shireen Chong, an American living in Oakland, California, get her hands on enough industrial-grade cyanide to drop 6 adults? Did she fly with it? TSA frowns on water bottles, let alone chemical weapons. It doesn't add up. Transporting that amount of chemical agents across international borders is incredibly difficult. Some have speculated she could have purchased it locally in Thailand, but cyanide isn't sold over the counter. It's used in industrial applications, mining, electroplating, pest control, but requires permits and documentation. Could she have accessed black market channels? Possibly, but there's been zero evidence presented by Thai police showing where or how she obtained the substance. Then there's the dosage issue. According to forensic experts, the victims passed away rapidly, possibly within minutes. Dr. Chanchai Sitipunt from Chulalongkorn University confirmed that cyanide was the only cause of passing and that the concentration must have been significant. But here's the thing. If the substance was that potent, and if all 6 people drank the tea at roughly the same time, which they must have, given none of them made it to the door or called for help, that means the cyanide had to be evenly and precisely distributed across 6 cups. Think about that. Chong would have had to carefully measure out lethal doses into each teacup without anyone noticing. The makeup artist, Dinh Tran Phu, reportedly never drank tea or coffee. His family confirmed this repeatedly. His mother even pointed out that crime scene photos showed a water bottle on the table, suggesting he may have been affected through bottled water instead. If true, that means Chong wasn't just poisoning tea, she was poisoning multiple beverages, fitting her method to individual victims. That level of premeditation is chilling, but it also raises questions. How did she know who would drink what? How did she ensure everyone consumed the mixture at the exact same time? And why did nobody react before it was too late? What if this wasn't a debt dispute at all? What if the debt was just a convenient cover story for something far more sinister? Consider the victims' backgrounds. Nguyen Phuong and Pham Than owned a construction company. Construction in Southeast Asia is notoriously linked to money laundering, corruption, and organized crime. What if their investment in a Japanese hospital wasn't just a bad business deal? What if it was a front for something illegal? Shireen Chong claimed to be connected to wealthy circles in Dubai. Dubai is a major hub for international finance, some of it legitimate, some less so. If Chong was involved in laundering money or facilitating illicit transactions, and if that operation was about to be exposed in a Japanese court, there would be powerful people with a vested interest in making sure that trial never happened. Some believe all 6 victims were targeted for removal, and the mutual destruction narrative was staged to make it look like a crime of passion rather than a calculated job. Think about the evidence. The door was locked from the inside, but a back door was found open. Could someone have exited through the back after administering the substance? There were no signs of struggle. Professional substances like cyanide can be administered in ways that incapacitate victims almost instantly, preventing any fight or flight response. There was untouched food. If this was truly a group meeting to discuss debt, why order an elaborate lunch that nobody ate? Was the food a distraction while the real plan took place? Then there is the Thai government's quick conclusion. Within 24 hours, authorities declared it solved. No prolonged investigation, no international forensic team, no deep dive into Chong's financial records or travel history. Just case closed. Thailand's tourism industry is massive. It's one of the country's primary sources of revenue. The Grand Hyatt incident happened literally one day after Thailand expanded its visa-free entry program to 93 countries to boost tourism. A mysterious mass event at a luxury hotel is a PR nightmare. A domestic dispute over personal debt? That's contained. That's explainable. That doesn't scare away tourists. Some online communities have pointed out that this isn't the first suspicious passing involving foreigners in Thailand. In fact, there's a disturbing pattern of tourist cases being quickly ruled as accidents or voluntary exits, often with minimal investigation. And that brings us to perhaps the most disturbing possibility of all, that there's a criminal network operating in Thailand that targets tourists, often wealthy ones, using sophisticated chemical mixtures that are difficult to detect in standard autopsies. According to this line of thinking, local authorities conduct superficial investigations and close cases quickly to protect the tourism industry. Families of victims have reportedly found connections between cases that officials refuse to investigate. Some believe that certain hotels, tour operators, or investment brokers are actually fronts for organized crime groups that identify, target, and rob or eliminate foreign nationals, particularly those carrying large amounts of cash or involved in shady financial deals. Perhaps all 6 were lured to Bangkok under the pretense of resolving the investment dispute, only to be removed by a third party who stood to benefit from their silence. Consider this. The makeup artist, Din Tran Phu, who by all accounts had nothing to do with the investment, was also lost. His family insists he didn't drink tea or coffee, yet he succumbed to cyanide. Why was he there? His mother believes he was specifically targeted through tainted water. There were 2 metal flasks found at the scene that didn't belong to the hotel. What were they? Who brought them? Police never explained. The darkened tea bag in the teapot was described by forensics as abnormally dark, suggesting a large amount of toxic substance was added. But if Chong added it herself, when did she have the opportunity without being seen by the waiter? Reddit communities and true crime forums have compiled lists of similar cases, foreign nationals vanishing or passing away under mysterious circumstances in Thailand, with investigations closed rapidly and families left with more questions than answers. Either way, the whole Grand Hyatt mystery just reminds us that the scariest idea isn't always some crazy conspiracy theory. Sometimes the real shocker is that we're being told exactly what we want to hear, so we'll drop the investigation and stop poking around. From a luxury hotel room to the wild outdoors, the setting changes, but the mystery remains. The Sans Bois Mountains. In French, it translates to without wood. a strange name for a place so dense with forest, rocks, and silence that it can swallow a family whole and refuse to burp up the evidence for 4 years. This is one of the most baffling disappearances in American history. On October 8th, 2009, reality seemed normal enough for the Jamison family. You had Bobby Jamison, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison. They lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, and they were looking for a fresh start. By a fresh start, I mean they wanted to buy a 40-acre plot of land on a mountain ridge near Red Oak, about 30 miles away. Their plan was to live in a storage container they already owned, an unconventional choice that matched their increasingly unconventional behavior in the months leading up to their disappearance. They never came home. Look at them. They look like a standard family unit, right? But in the months leading up to this trip, the Jamison household had descended into bizarre behavior. They were thin, they were erratic, and they were scared. But on this specific day, they packed up their pickup truck and headed for the mountains. The last photo of Madison was taken that day. Days passed. No one heard from Bobby or Sherilyn. 8 days later, on October 16th, their pickup truck was discovered. It was sitting on a dirt road in Latimer County, a few miles from the town of Kinta. What police found inside that truck would turn a missing persons case into one of Oklahoma's most baffling mysteries. Their IDs were there, their wallets were there, their cell phones sat untouched on the seats. Sherilyn's purse was still inside. A GPS system was mounted on the dash, and stacked under the driver's seat, tucked away like a secret, was approximately $32,000 in cash. That is down payment on a house money. Who drives into the woods with that kind of cash? And more importantly, if someone attacked them, why leave it? And there was one witness left behind. Maisie, Madison's dog. She was found in the truck, barely clinging to life. She had been locked inside for 8 days without food or water. She was severely malnourished but alive. Nothing was stolen. No one had taken the money, the electronics, or anything else of value. The truck was simply left there, as if the family had stepped out for a moment and vanished into the Oklahoma wilderness. For more than 4 years, the Jamisons remained missing. Then, on November 16, 2013, 2 hunters stumbled upon skeletal remains in a remote area of Latimer County, less than 3 miles from where the truck had been abandoned. The remains of 2 adults and 1 child were lying face down, side by side, in what some described as a systematic arrangement. On July 3, 2014, the Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office confirmed what everyone suspected. The remains belonged to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison. But due to the advanced state of decomposition, the cause of passing could not be determined. No ballistic evidence was recovered, no weapon was found, no definitive evidence pointed to any single explanation. What made this case so haunting wasn't the lack of clues, it was that there were too many clues, and every single one pointed in a different direction. Sherilyn Jamison's mental health history made a tragic voluntary ending impossible to ignore. She had been divorced before and lost custody of her child from that marriage. Following the divorce, she developed bipolar disorder and severe depression, even attempted to permanently check out at one point. Inside the truck, police found an 11-page letter Sherilyn had written to Bobby. The contents were brutal. She called him a hermit and a loner, who didn't care about their daughter. The letter was filled with resentment and rage. Sherilyn also kept a .22 caliber pistol in the truck. That gun was never found. And when the medical examiner inspected Bobby's skull, they noted a small hole that could have been from a projectile, though decomposition made it impossible to confirm. On the surface, it seems plausible. A mentally unstable woman, a failing marriage, a gun, and a family found in the woods. But the logistics fall apart under scrutiny. All 3 remains were found lying face down, side by side, in what appeared to be an organized arrangement. If Sherilyn had ended Bobby and Madison, did she then calmly lie down next to them and orchestrate her own finale? If so, where's the gun? Bobby suffered from chronic back pain so severe that he was on disability. He could barely walk without assistance. How would Sherilyn have forced him to march 3 miles into the wilderness at gunpoint? And why wouldn't Bobby or Madison have grabbed coats, phones, or anything else? Bobby Jamison's relationship with his father, Bob Dean Jamison, was poisonous. In April 2009, just 6 months before the disappearance, Bobby filed a protective order against his father, claiming Bob Dean had threatened to end him and his family. Bobby alleged that on November 1, 2008, his father had intentionally hit him with his car. He described Bob Dean as a very dangerous man who thinks he is above the law, and claimed his father was involved with illicit company and dangerous synthetics. There were also rumors, never confirmed, that Bob Dean had connections to the Mexican mafia. 2 months after the Jamisons vanished, Bob Dean Jamison passed away in December 2009 at age 64. His brother Jack Jamison insisted that Bob Dean was either in a hospital or rest home at the time of the disappearance, and that while he was a disturbed individual, he was not capable of committing the crime. Even if Bob Dean was physically incapable of carrying out the brutal acts himself, he could have hired someone. But here's the glaring problem. If this was a contracted job, why didn't the perpetrator take the $32,000 in cash from the truck? A hitman doesn't leave that kind of money behind. Sheriff Beauchamp later stated that Bob Dean had a solid alibi and was dismissed as a person of interest. But the question remains, did he pay someone to do it? There's another possibility that suggests the Jamisons may have walked willingly to their ends, fleeing something that existed only in their minds. Folie à deux, French for madness of two, is a rare psychiatric phenomenon where two or more people share the same delusion. It typically occurs between closely bonded individuals, and in this case, it may have consumed an entire family. Sherilyn had bipolar disorder and sometimes refused to take her medication. Both Bobby and Sherilyn had told their pastor, Gary Brandon, that they were experiencing spiritual warfare in their home. They claimed to see spirits inside the house. Sherilyn described them as the ghosts of a long-dead family. Bobby said some of the spirits had wings. At one point, Bobby asked Pastor Brandon if he could obtain special rounds to engage the spirits kinetically. When the pastor refused, Bobby admitted he had turned to the Satanic Bible to try to rid their home of evil. The family had even taken 6-year-old Madison to see the pastor because she claimed she was seeing and talking to ghosts too. After their disappearance, investigators found a witch's Bible in the Jamison home. Outside, on the storage container they planned to move into, someone had scrawled, "3 cats killed to date by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed." Sherilyn had written the message to scare off neighbors who had been poisoning their cats, but it added to the eerie atmosphere surrounding the case. Then there's the surveillance video, that trance-like state, the robotic movements, the complete lack of communication between Bobby and Sherilyn as they packed. What if they weren't packing to move? What if they were packing to escape, to flee from something invisible, something terrifying, something that didn't exist outside their shared delusion? If the Jamisons were experiencing a shared psychotic episode, they may have believed they needed to leave everything behind, phones, money, identification, to escape the evil they thought was pursuing them. They may have walked 3 miles into the wilderness, convinced they were saving themselves and their daughter from supernatural forces. And then what? Did they collapse from exposure? Did the delusion lead them to harm themselves? Did they lie down together, believing they were finally safe, and simply never wake up? The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause. No gunshot wounds were definitive. No signs of violence were conclusive. The remains were just there, arranged side by side, as if placed with care or as if they had lain down together willingly. Former Sheriff Israel Beauchamp, who worked the case for years before leaving the force, said something chilling. Normally, you can go through an investigation and, one by one, start to eliminate certain scenarios. We haven't been able to do that in this case. With this family, everything seems possible. Somewhere in those Oklahoma mountains, the truth perished with Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison. And unless new evidence surfaces, evidence that somehow survived years of decomposition, weather, and wildlife, the mystery of the Jamison family will haunt Oklahoma forever. And sometimes, nature itself is the weapon. August 1993. Southern Siberia. The Khamar Daban mountain range sits beneath Lake Baikal, a popular summer hiking destination known for its untamed beauty and relatively safe terrain. That summer, 41-year-old Lyudmila Korovina, a master of sports in hiking and experienced instructor from the Petropavl Azimut Tourist Club, planned what should have been a routine trek through the mountains. Lyudmila was legendary among her students, tough, demanding, but deeply knowledgeable about survival. She'd hiked Khamar Daban before and knew the terrain like the back of her hand. 6 of her students joined her for this expedition. There was Alexander Sacha Krisin, 23 years old. Lyudmila looked at him like a son. Then we have Tatiana Filipenko, 24, Denis Shvachkin, 19, Valentina Valya Utochenko, 17, Victoria Zalesova, 16, and the baby of the group, Timur Bapanov, just 15. They arrived in Irkutsk by train on August 2nd, 1993. The weather forecast promised clear, sunny skies. Because if there's one thing you can always trust, it's a weather report from a government infrastructure that is actively crumbling, right? They were one of 3 hiking groups in the area. One of the others was led by Lyudmila's own daughter, Natalia. They planned a cute little family reunion on August 5th, where their routes would intersect. For the first 2 days, everything was sunshine and rainbows. Literally. They climbed Retranslator Peak, made excellent time, and bonded over the shared agony of carrying heavy backpacks uphill. But on August 4th, the forecast was wrong. Shocking, I know. Heavy rains hit without warning. The extra weight of wet supplies slowed everyone down. Despite there being tree cover nearby, which offers, protection from the elements, Lyudmila ordered them to set up camp in an exposed location on the slope. Maybe she wanted to test their endurance? Maybe she just really liked the view of the grey fog. We'll never know. They tried to build a fire that night but failed because wet wood tends to not burn. Who knew? But hey, spirits remained high. They were tough kids. The next morning, August 5th, they actually got a fire going. They had breakfast, they packed up, they were ready to head down to meet Natalia. And then, hell opened up. Everything we know about the next few minutes comes from one person, 17-year-old Valentina Utachenko, the sole survivor. They were descending at an altitude of about 2,396 meters. Sacha Kresin, the 23-year-old son of the group, was at the back. Suddenly he started screaming. The group turned around. Sasha was in a state of catastrophic medical distress. He was bleeding internally and externally, his body rejecting something. He was convulsing, foaming at the mouth, his system shutting down in real time. He collapsed, thrashing in the snow, and then just went still. Lyudmila sprinted to him, desperately trying to revive her student, the boy she'd known for most of his life. Then she started screaming too. The same symptoms, severe internal failure. She collapsed on top of Sacha's motionless body. Tatiana Filipenko, who'd reached Lyudmila first, was next. She grabbed at her throat, fighting for air, and in a state of absolute delirium, she struck herself against a nearby rock, driven by pain we can't even imagine, until she went limp. Panic erupted. Victoria and Timur acted on instinct. Run. They took off, but they didn't get far. Both collapsed mid-stride. They were expelling fluids, clawing at their throats, engaging in what looked like paradoxical undressing, and tearing at their gear because their skin felt like it was on fire. They passed right there in the snow. Valentina and Denis Shvachkin ran together. Then Denis dropped, convulsing. Valentina kept running. She was 17, she was alone, and everyone she knew had just been extinguished in a matter of minutes, looking like they were being erased by an invisible hand. Valentina managed to set up a tent under tree cover that night. I don't know how she fell asleep. I would have been staring at the tent zipper waiting for a demon to walk in. But she did. The next morning, she went back. She returned to the site where her friends lay in unnatural, tragic positions to retrieve supplies from their remains. She needed food. She needed a map. Survival instinct is a powerful drug. For 4 days, she followed power lines down the mountain. Eventually, she found a river. On August 9th, a group of Ukrainian kayakers saw her. Some say she was covered in dark, dried stains. When they approached, she collapsed, weeping. The kayakers brought her to the nearest police station and filed a report. But Valentina couldn't speak for several days. Trauma had locked her voice away. Despite the police receiving the report, no formal search was conducted until August 24th, 19 days after the fatal events. Because Valentina hadn't been able to recount what happened, it took helicopters 2 full days to locate the remains. When they finally found them, the scene was disturbing. The hikers were missing layers of gear. All showed signs of bruised lungs. The official autopsy concluded that 5 of the hikers succumbed of hypothermia. Lyudmila Korovina passed away of a heart attack. Protein deficiency due to malnutrition was listed as a contributing factor. Case closed. Losses ruled accidental. Except nothing about this case makes sense, and that's where things get interesting. Cyanogen chloride, designated CK by military forces, is a blood agent, a type of chemical weapon that prevents cells from using oxygen. The Soviet Union extensively researched and tested CK during the Cold War era, and here's where it gets terrifying. Cyanogen chloride can remain dormant in soil and reactivate when exposed to heat. Some believe the Khamar Daban area had CK compound deposited from previous Soviet military testing. When Lyudmila's group lit their morning campfire on August 5th, the heat reactivated the liquefied gas in the ground. The smoke became fatal. The symptoms match perfectly. Exposure to cyanogen chloride causes violent convulsions, excessive salivation and foaming at the mouth, internal bleeding, respiratory distress, and rapid passing. Sound familiar? That's exactly what Valentina described. The timeline fits. The tragic events occurred shortly after the group had breakfast around their campfire. If CK was in the soil, the heat from the fire could have vaporized it, creating a catastrophic cloud of gas that drifted over the hikers as they descended. The autopsy findings align too. Bruised lungs are consistent with respiratory distress from chemical exposure. The official cause, hypothermia, could have occurred because victims were incapacitated by the gas and subsequently passed from exposure to the cold. There were reports of strange animal behavior in the area. According to some accounts, animals in the Khamar Daban region had been observed throwing themselves in front of vehicles or acting erratically. Chemical contamination could explain this. Valentina's survival makes sense under this scenario. If she wasn't near the campfire when the gas was released, or if she moved away from the contaminated area quickly enough, she could have avoided lethal exposure. The Soviet cover-up fits the pattern too. The 19-day delay before the official search, the rushed autopsy that blamed hypothermia despite Valentina's testimony, the case being closed as accidental. All of this screams cover-up. The Soviet government had a well-documented history of concealing military accidents and chemical weapons testing failures. But there's a problem. Why would the Soviets test chemical weapons in a popular tourist area during peak hiking season? Khamar Daban was known to have multiple hiking groups passing through at any given time in summer. It seems reckless, even for the secretive Soviet military, unless they weren't testing it there intentionally. What if the chemical weapons testing occurred elsewhere, higher in the mountains, in a more remote location, and the heavy rains on August 4th washed contaminated soil and residue down to where Lyudmila's group camped? That would explain both the presence of CK and why authorities might not have anticipated danger in that specific location. Still, questions remain. If this was chemical contamination, why weren't other hiking groups affected? Why did Natalia's group, also in the area, experience nothing unusual? This brings us to an even more sinister possibility. If you've heard of one nerve agent in recent years, it's probably Novichok. In 2018, former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned with Novichok in Salisbury, England. They survived, but the incident thrust this fatal family of chemical weapons into international headlines. Here's what makes Novichok absolutely terrifying. It's considered the most harmful nerve agent ever created. It's approximately 10 times more lethal than VX, and 20 times more lethal than sarin. A tiny amount, a droplet smaller than a grain of salt, can end a life within minutes. And according to reports, Novichok agents were tested near the Khamar Daban region until 1993, the exact year of the tragedy. Some believe the hikers were exposed to residual Novichok contamination, either from testing sites or from materials that had been washed down by the August 4th rainstorm. The symptoms are a perfect match. Novichok exposure causes foaming at the mouth, severe internal hemorrhaging, violent convulsions and seizures, respiratory failure and cardiac arrest, and sudden passing. Every single symptom Valentina described matches Novichok poisoning. The autopsy findings support it. Bruised lungs indicate severe respiratory distress, a typical sign of nerve agent exposure. Lyudmila's heart attack could have been caused by the nerve agent's effect on her cardiac system. The other hikers' hypothermia could have been secondary. They were incapacitated by the nerve agent and subsequently lost their lives from cold exposure. The Soviet Union was actively developing Novichok at this time. The Novichok program was highly classified and ran from the 1970s through 1993. The Soviet government had a documented pattern of testing chemical weapons in remote Siberian locations where they believed exposure risks could be controlled. The Russian government's cover-up is consistent with their behavior. When the Skripal poisoning occurred in 2018, Russia denied involvement for months, despite overwhelming evidence. In 1993, with the Soviet Union having just collapsed, covering up a chemical weapons accident would have been a priority to avoid international condemnation and domestic panic. But here's the million-dollar question. Why did Valentina survive? If the group was exposed to Novichok, one of the most lethal substances ever created, how did a 17-year-old girl walk away? Nerve agents don't discriminate. They act indiscriminately. Some researchers suggest she may have been positioned upwind when the exposure occurred, or that she received a sub-lethal dose, and her youth and physical fitness helped her survive. But this explanation feels incomplete. Novichok is so dangerous that even partial exposure typically proves fatal. This paradox has led some investigators to consider a third deeply disturbing possibility. What if the person we've been viewing as the victim and sole survivor was actually the perpetrator? What if Valentina Utachenko administered a toxic substance to the entire group using rodenticide, common rat poison, which contains powerful anticoagulants like warfarin or brodifacoum. Before you dismiss this as impossible, consider the evidence. The symptoms align with anticoagulant poisoning. Rat poison works by preventing blood from clotting, causing massive internal and external hemorrhaging. Advanced poisoning produces severe hemorrhaging from facial orifices, internal bleeding in the lungs, explaining the bruised lungs found in autopsy, bleeding in the brain, which could trigger seizures and convulsions, and cardiovascular collapse, explaining Lyudmila's heart attack. Valentina's survival becomes the smoking gun. If she tainted the group's food or water, she simply wouldn't consume the contaminated substance herself. This would explain why she alone survived, while everyone else departed, exhibiting identical symptoms. Rat poison was readily available in the Soviet Union. Rodenticides were common household and agricultural products. Valentina could have obtained it without raising suspicion. There are reports that Valentina was the only one who didn't drink the melted snow water that morning. According to some accounts, the group melted snow for drinking water after breakfast. If Valentina spiked this water, refusing to drink it herself would explain her survival perfectly. Her testimony becomes suspect under this line of thinking. If Valentina poisoned the group, her entire account of what happened would be fabricated to avoid suspicion. The dramatic descriptions of people bleeding from their eyes, convulsing and passing away in rapid succession could be partially true. Those are real symptoms of anticoagulant poisoning. But the sequence and her role would be lies designed to paint herself as a traumatized survivor rather than a perpetrator. The timeline supports premeditation. Anticoagulant poisoning doesn't eliminate instantly. It takes hours, sometimes days, for symptoms to appear, depending on the dose. The group had breakfast, packed up, and began descending before anyone showed symptoms. This delay is consistent with ingested poison rather than environmental gas exposure. Her behavior after the incident raises questions. Valentina returned to the remains the next day to retrieve supplies. For someone who had just watched 6 people pass away in horrific fashion, this shows remarkable composure. Some might call it survival instinct. Others might call it cold-blooded. But here's where this gets complicated. What would her motive be? Valentina was 17 years old. She'd trained with this group for months. There's no documented evidence of conflict between her and the other hikers. She had no apparent reason to eliminate 6 people, including a respected instructor she'd known for years. Some researchers have suggested that if this is true, Valentina may have been experiencing a severe psychological break. Others point to the possibility of coercion. Could someone have forced her to poison the group? Could there have been a 7th unseen person involved? This also raises uncomfortable questions about the Soviet investigation. If Valentina poisoned the group, why didn't the autopsy reveal anticoagulant poisoning? The answer might be simple. Toxicology testing in 1993, rural Siberia was limited. Anticoagulant rodenticides might not have been included in a standard screening, especially if investigators had already decided these were accidental. There's one more disturbing detail. Valentina has never spoken publicly about the incident since her initial 1993 police testimony. She's kept a low profile for over 30 years. For some, this silence suggests trauma. For others, it suggests guilt. Whether the answer lies in Soviet military secrets, environmental contamination, or something far more personal and sinister, 6 families never got closure. One survivor never told her full story. And somewhere in the mountains of Buryatia, the truth remains buried in the snow. From the freezing cold to the tropical heat, we move to a case where the water is warm, but the trail is cold. When 23-year-old Amy Linn Bradley stepped onto the Rhapsody of the Seas in March 1998, she was starting what should have been a dream vacation with her family. 7 days later, she would vanish without a trace, sparking one of the most disturbing missing persons cases in modern history. The night of March 23rd started like any other cruise evening. Amy and her brother Brad hit the ship's disco on the 9th floor deck, dancing and drinking with Blue Orchid, the ship's house band. Videographer Chris Fenwick caught footage of Amy dancing with Alistair Yellow Douglas, one of the band members, sometime before 1 a.m. According to Douglas, he left the party around that time, but multiple witnesses would later contradict this claim. The ship's computerized door lock system tells us exactly when Amy returned to her family's cabin, 3:40 a.m., just 5 minutes after Brad. Her brother later said they sat on the balcony talking before he went to sleep. Amy stayed awake longer. Between 5:15 and 5:30 a.m., their father, Ron, woke up and saw Amy asleep on the balcony lounge chair. He could see her legs from the hips down. When he checked again at 6 a.m., she was gone. Her cigarettes and lighter had vanished with her. Ron searched the common areas. Nothing. At 6:30 a.m., he woke the family and told them Amy was missing. They immediately rushed to the ship's crew, begging them to make an announcement and stop the 2,000 passengers from leaving the ship. The crew said it was too early to make a ship-wide announcement. They agreed to issue one at 7:50 a.m. after most passengers had already disembarked. The announcement they finally made was almost casual. "Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk?" That delay has been called one of the biggest mistakes in the case. By the time the crew started searching, critical hours had passed. Hours that could have made all the difference. But here's where things get disturbing. 3 witnesses claimed they saw Amy on the upper deck with Alistair Douglas between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m. after her father last saw her sleeping. They said Douglas handed her a drink containing dark liquid. They saw them arrive on the elevator together, and then watched Douglas leave the upper deck alone shortly after 6 a.m. Even stranger? Brad said Douglas approached him shortly after Amy disappeared and said, "Hey man, I'm sorry to hear about your sister." No announcement had been made yet. How did Douglas know she was missing? The FBI interviewed Douglas and gave him a polygraph test. Royal Caribbean reported he passed. Ron Bradley remembers it differently. He came out of the interview smiling, with his thumbs up to his band members, like everything's cool. "I knew what was going on. I knew he had been with Amy. The most widely discussed possibility, and the one that keeps Amy's family searching, is that she was kidnapped and sold into the illicit human cargo trade. Multiple reported sightings support this terrifying scenario. 1 month after Amy disappeared, her family traveled to Curacao. A cab driver approached them and said he'd seen Amy on March 24th, the day she vanished. He claimed she was running through a parking lot near the docks, searching for a phone. He remembered her green eyes, which matched the description on the reward poster. He also said he'd seen her in other locations on the island, but his claims were never verified. Then in August 1998, 2 Canadian divers reported seeing a woman they believed was Amy at a beach in Curacao called Playa Porto Marie. David Carmichael was one of them. He said the woman was with 2 intimidating men, and one looked like Alistair Douglas. When Carmichael yelled to a friend in English, asking about dive gear, the woman spun around and started walking toward him. That's when the man resembling Douglas appeared and motioned her away to the beach bar. Carmichael was only 2 feet away from her. He described her eyes and tattoos with perfect accuracy. He later said, "I am haunted by that encounter with Amy. I know it was her." He even flew to Virginia to meet the Bradley family and share what he saw. The most disturbing report came from U.S. Navy Petty Officer William Hefner. In January 1999, he claimed he was at a restricted adult establishment in Curacao when a Caucasian woman approached him. She identified herself as Amy Bradley and begged for help. She told him she'd been on a cruise, left the ship to find drugs, and was now being held against her will. Hefner didn't report it at the time because he was afraid of damaging his military career by admitting he'd been at a restricted adult establishment. He finally contacted the Bradley family in May 2002. By then, it had burned down, and the FBI found no evidence to support his claim. In 2005, things escalated. 2 photographs surfaced online showing a woman in revealing clothing who resembled Amy. The images appeared on a website advertising adult companionship in the Caribbean. The woman was listed as Jas, and witnesses described her as appearing distraught and despondent. The photos were sent to Amy's parents, who appeared on Dr. Phil to discuss them. The FBI investigated but couldn't authenticate the images. However, a forensic analyst who worked with the Bureau performed facial comparisons and concluded the woman in the photos was likely Amy. That same year, tourist Judy Mara claimed she saw Amy in a department store restroom in Bridgetown, Barbados. Mara said 4 men were with her, discussing what sounded like an illegal deal. At one point, the woman asked if they could stop and see the children. When the men left the restroom, Mara approached her. The woman said she was from West Virginia, and softly said her name was Amy. The FBI created composite sketches based on Mara's account, but no arrests were made. Some investigators and internet sleuths believe Amy never left the ship alive. They point to suspicious behavior from crew members, starting with the waiter who repeatedly approached the Bradley family that final night. He kept asking them to pass a note to Amy, inviting her to go drinking with him once they reached shore. Why was he so insistent? And why did he disappear from the narrative so quickly? Then there's the matter of the missing photos. The ship's professional photographer had printed all photos taken during the cruise and displayed them for sale at a stall. The Bradley family couldn't find a single photo of Amy. It seemed like someone had deliberately removed them. Brad Bradley has been vocal about his suspicions. In a 2024 post on X, formerly Twitter, he revealed that Douglas's roommate reported that the ship's crew searched their cabin for Amy before the family reported her missing. Brad wrote, "I thought the company line the employees were supposed to parrot was that she jumped or fell." Royal Caribbean maintained that Amy either fell overboard or chose to end things. The Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard searched for 4 days, believing her body would wash ashore if she'd gone into the water. It never did. Amy's family has strongly rejected this explanation. Brad told People magazine, "She had way too much going for her. She just graduated college, was about to start a new job, and had gotten a new apartment." There's a third line of thinking that's less discussed but equally unsettling. Some believe Amy voluntarily left the ship and is living quietly somewhere in the Caribbean, possibly Barbados. This is based on a strange digital trail. Internet sleuths discovered IP addresses tracing back to Barbados, roughly 650 miles from Curaçao, that show someone routinely logging into forums related to Amy's disappearance on key anniversaries and birthdays. Could it be Amy herself, checking to see if anyone's still looking? It's a stretch, but stranger things have happened. If Amy wanted to disappear, she had the means and the opportunity. But why would someone with a full scholarship, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of her choose to vanish forever? In 1999, the Bradley family received an email from a man named Frank Jones. He claimed to be a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer with a team of experienced soldiers who had located Amy. Jones said she was being held by heavily armed Colombian personnel in a housing complex surrounded by barbed wire. His team gave accurate descriptions of Amy's tattoos and even sang the lullaby her mother used to sing to her. Over several months, Jones fed the family information and sightings. When he said his team was ready to attempt a rescue, he asked for more funds. The Bradleys sent him $210,000 in total, believing they were funding the mission to bring their daughter home. The call from Jones and his team never came. Frank Jones had made the entire thing up. In February 2002, federal prosecutors in Richmond charged him with defrauding the Bradleys of $24,444 and the National Missing Children's Organization of $186,416. He pleaded guilty in April and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Amy was declared legally gone on March 24, 2010, 12 years after her disappearance, but her case has never truly closed. In October 2025, The Hollywood Reporter revealed that 3 very significant new leads had emerged. One involved a female bar server from the cruise ship who corroborated that Amy was taken off the boat. In July 2025, Netflix released a 3-part documentary series titled Amy Bradley is Missing, reigniting public interest in the case. That same month, podcast host Ethan Klein announced on the H3 podcast that he would offer a $1 million reward for any information leading to Amy being safely returned home. The FBI is still offering $25,000 for information leading to her whereabouts or the arrest of those responsible. Amy's family has offered $250,000 for her safe return. The case of Amy Linn Bradley is a nightmare that refuses to end, filled with possibilities that suggest something far more sinister than an accident at sea. And until someone comes forward with the truth, her family and the world will keep searching.